everyone, it's Miss Peggy again, and it's story time. And today we're on chapter 13 of The Magician's Nephew. And as I was thinking last night about chapter 12, where the animals had discovered Uncle Andrew and didn't really know what to make of him and decided that he was a plant and needed to be planted. And so they stuck him in the ground. But they started off with him upside down first, and his money fell out of his pocket. I got thinking about that last night and thinking, I think somewhere in all my stuff, I have some English money still. So I was rummaging through the drawers to see if I could find anything of mine from 60 years ago that I could show you. And I did find a few things. So let's start with the smallest coin that I have, which is an English penny. And here it is. There we go. You can see that it's got the king's picture on the front of it. That's actually Queen Victoria's son. So this is an old penny. And there's the back of it. And it's pretty big, too. Here's one of our pennies, our cents, to compare. You can see, there we are. You can see how much bigger an English penny is to one of ours. Okay, so that's a penny. Now, you have to remember that in English money, their base unit is a pound, right? And we talked about that a little bit yesterday, how a pound back in 1880 or so would be worth a little over $100 now. So a pretty valuable piece of money. A penny was 1/240th of a pound, 240 pennies in a pound. And the next size piece I've got to show you is a 3 penny piece. I'll show you that now. Can you see that? Can you see it says 3 pence on there? And this little coin here would be called a threepenny bit if you lived in England. Now, they don't have these anymore, mind you. I think I mentioned yesterday that they've changed their money system altogether. So now they have a pound, all right, but they have 100 pennies in the pound, and they don't have any little intermediate coins like threepenny bits. And I thought I had a sixpence here somewhere, but apparently I don't have a sixpence. Sorry. All right, and the next biggest one would be a shilling. Here's a shilling. It's about the size of a quarter. And here's Queen Victoria on the back of it. Can you see that? It's hard for me to tell whether you can see that clearly. But anyway, there's a picture of Queen Victoria on the back. So this is as old as Uncle Andrew's money was. And it's made out of silver, even though mine is very dark because it's tarnished and probably needs a good polishing. All right, a shilling. And there were 20 of those in a pound. So each one of those shillings is worth 12 pennies. Got that? Okay. Then the next one is a 2 shilling piece. Let me put that up close to the camera so you can see it. And it's called a florin. In case you're reading books about England and it says something cost 4 florins, well, that would be 4 times 2 shillings. Can you see the word 2 shillings written on the back there, written down near the bottom of the piece? All right, 2 shillings. All right, and the next one is one that is mentioned in our story, and it's called a half crown. All right, here's the half crown. It's a little bit bigger than a florin, and it's made out of silver, like the florin is, and it's worth 2 shillings and 6pence. So there's 8 of these in a pound. I'm sure you're completely square on all of that, aren't you? And I regret to say that I don't have any 10 shilling notes or any pounds. I guess in 60 years, they've just kind of, if I ever had any to keep, I don't have them anymore. But here's a gold coin that looks sort of like a half sovereign that Uncle Andrew had in his pocket, which would be worth 10 shillings, half a pound. And this is not really gold, but it's about the size of a sovereign, a half sovereign. So there you are. Now I'm sure you've got it all straight. So that when you go to the store and they tell you, all right, dear, that'll be 1 pound, 7 6, and you're frantically thinking, what? 240 pennies to the pound, and she said 7 shillings and 6. Anyway, after a while, you do get used to it. But it's not an easy system, so you can see why maybe it was a good idea for them to change in the 1960s, I believe it was, to a system where they had 100 pennies in a pound, just like we have 100 cents in a dollar. All right, that's enough of that. Let's go on now to chapter 13, which is called An Unexpected Meeting. Wake up, Diggory! Wake up, Fledge! Came the voice of Polly. It has turned into a toffee tree, and it's the loveliest morning. The low, early sunshine was streaming through the wood, and the grass was gray with dew, and the cobwebs were just like silver. Just beside them was a little, very dark wooded tree, about the size of an apple tree. The leaves were whitish and rather papery, and it was loaded with little brown fruits that looked rather like dates. Hooray, said Diggory, but I'm going to have a dip first. And he rushed through the flowering thicket and down to the river's edge. Have you ever bathed in a mountain stream that is running in shallow cataracts over red and blue and yellow stones with the sun on it? It's as good as the ocean. In some ways, it's even better. Of course, he had to dress again without drying, but it's well worth it. When he came back, Polly went down and had her bathe. At least she said that's what she had been doing, but we know she wasn't much of a swimmer, and perhaps it's best to ask not too many questions. Fledge visited the river too, but he only stood in the middle of the stream, stooping down for long drinks of water and then shaking his mane and neighing several times. Diggory and Polly got to work on the toffee tree. The fruit was delicious. Not exactly like toffee, softer for one thing, and juicy, but like a fruit that reminded you of toffee. Fledge also made an excellent breakfast. He tried one of the toffee fruits and liked it, but he said he felt more like grass at that hour in the morning. Then, with some difficulty, the children got back onto his back, and the second journey began. It was even better than yesterday, partly because everyone was feeling so fresh, and partly because the newly risen sun was at their backs, and so, of course, everything looks nicer with the light behind you. It was a wonderful ride. The big, snowy mountains rose above them in every direction. The valleys far below them were so green, and all the streams that tumbled down from the glaciers into the main river were so blue that it was like flying over gigantic pieces of jewelry. They would have liked this part of the adventure to go on longer than it did, but soon they were all sniffing the air and saying, "What is it? Did you smell that? Where is it coming from?" For a heavenly smell, warm and golden, as if from all the most delicious fruits and flowers of the world, was coming up from something ahead. "It's coming from that valley with the lake in it," said Fledge. "So it is," said Diggory, "and look, there's a green hill at the far end of the lake, and look how blue the water is." Here they are flying toward that hill at the end of the lake. "This must be the place," said all three. Fledge came lower and lower in wide circles. The icy peaks rose up higher and higher above. The air came up warmer and sweeter every moment, so sweet that it almost brought tears to your eyes. Fledge was now gliding with his great wings spread out motionless on either side and his hoofs pawing for the ground. The green steep hill was rushing toward them. A moment later, he alighted on its slope a little awkwardly. The children rolled off, fell without hurting themselves on the warm, fine grass, and stood up panting a little. They were about 3/4 of the way up the hill, and they set out at once to climb to the top. I don't think Fledge could have managed this without his wings, because he had to give a flutter now and then, because the side of the hill was so steep. All around, the very top of the hill ran a great high wall of green turf. Inside the wall, trees were growing. Their branches hung over the wall, and their leaves showed only not green, but blue and silver when the wind stirred them. When the travelers reached the top, they walked nearly all the way around it, on the outside of the green wall, before they found the gates, high gates of gold facing due east. Until now, I think Fledge and Polly had the idea that they would go in with Diggory, but they thought so no longer. You never saw a place that was so obviously private. You could see at once that it belonged to someone else. Only a fool would dream of going in there unless he had been sent there on special business. Diggory himself understood at once that the others wouldn't and couldn't come in with him. He went forward to the gates alone. When he had come up close to them, he saw words written on the gold with silver letters, something like this: "Come in by the gold gates or not at all. Take of my fruit, for others or forbear. For those who steal or those who climb my wall shall find their heart's desire and find despair." "Take of my fruit for others," said Diggory to himself. "Well, that's what I'm going to do. It means that I mustn't eat any of it myself, I suppose. I don't know what all that bit in the last line is about. Come in by the golden gates. Well, who'd want to climb a wall if they could get in by the gates? But how do the gates open?" He laid his hand on them, and instantly they swung apart, opening inward, turning on their hinges without the least noise. Now he could see into the place. It looked more private than ever. Everything was very quiet inside. Even the fountain, which rose near the middle of the garden, made only the faintest sound. The lovely smell was all around him. It was a happy place, but it was very serious. He knew which was the right tree at once, partly because it stood in the very center, and partly because the great silver apples with which it was loaded shone so and cast a light of their own down on the shadowy places where the sunlight did not reach. He walked straight across to it, picked an apple, and put it in the pocket of his jacket. But he couldn't help looking at it and smelling it before he put it away. It would have been better if he had not. A terrible hunger and thirst came over him, and a longing to taste that fruit. He put it hastily into his pocket, but there were plenty of others. Could it be wrong to taste one? After all, he thought, the notice on the gate might not have been exactly an order. It might have only been a piece of advice. And who cares about advice? Or even if it were an order, would it be disobeying it by eating an apple? He'd already obeyed the part about taking one for others. While he was thinking of all this, he happened to look up through the branches toward the top of the tree. And there, on a branch above his head, a wonderful bird was roosting. I say roosting because it seemed to be asleep. Perhaps not quite. The tiniest bit of one eye was open. It was larger than an eagle. Its breast was yellow, its head crested with scarlet, and its tail purple. Here's a picture of the beautiful apple tree and the bird and Diggory. "And it just so shows," said Diggory afterward, when he was telling the story to others, "that you can't be too careful in these magical places. You never know what might be watching you." But I think that Diggory would not have taken an apple for himself in any case. Things like "do not steal" were, I think, hammered into the heads of little boys a good deal harder than they are now. Still, we can't be certain. Diggory was just turning to go back to the gates when he stopped to have one last look around. He got a terrible shock. He was not alone. There, only a few yards away from him, stood the witch. She was just throwing away the core of an apple, which she had eaten. The juice was darker than you might have expected, and it made a horrible stain around her mouth. Diggory guessed at once that she must have climbed in over the wall, and he began to see that there might be some sense in that last line about getting your heart's desire and getting despair along with it. For the witch looked stronger and prouder than ever, and even in a way triumphant, but her face was deadly white as salt. All this flashed through Diggory's mind in a second, and then he took to his heels and ran for the gate as hard as he could, the witch after him. And as soon as he was out, the gates closed behind him of their own accord. This gave him the lead, but not for long. By the time he had reached the others and was shouting, "Quick, get on, Polly, get up, Fledge," the witch had climbed the wall or vaulted over it and was close behind him again. "Stay where you are," said Diggory, turning around to face her, "or we'll all vanish. Don't you come an inch closer." "Foolish boy," said the witch, "why do you run from me? I mean you no harm. If you don't stop and listen to me now, you'll miss some knowledge that will make you happy all your life." "Well, I don't want to hear it, thanks," said Diggory. But he did. "I know what errand you have come on," continued the witch, "for it was I who was close behind you in the woods last night and heard all your counsels. You have plucked fruit in the garden yonder. You have it in your pocket now, and you are going to carry it back untasted to the lion, for him to eat, for him to use. You idiot, don't you know what that fruit is? I will tell you. It is the apple of youth, the apple of life. I know, for I have tasted it, and I already feel changes in myself. I know that I will never grow old. I will never die. Eat it, boy, eat it. And you and I will both live forever and be king and queen of this whole world, or of your world if we decide to go back there." "No thanks," said Diggory. "I don't know that I care much about living on and on after everyone I know that is dead. I'd rather live an ordinary time and die and go to heaven." "But what about this mother of yours that you pretend to love so?" "What has she got to do with it?" said Diggory. "Do you not see, fool, that one bite of that apple would heal her? You have it in your pocket. We are here by ourselves and the lion is far away. Use your magic to go back to your own world. A minute later, you could be at your mother's bedside and giving her the fruit. 5 minutes later, you'll see the color coming back into her face. And she will tell you that her pain is gone. And soon she will tell you that she feels stronger. Then she will fall asleep. Think of that. Hours of sweet, natural sleep. Without pain, without drugs. Next day, everyone will be saying how wonderfully she has recovered. And soon she'll be quite well again. All will be well again. Your home will be happy again. You will be like other boys. "Oh," gasped Diggory as if he had been hurt, and he put his hand on his head, for he knew that the most terrible choice lay before him. "What has the lion ever done for you that you should be his slave?" said the witch. "What can he do to you once you're back in your own world? And what would your mother think if she knew that you could have taken her pain away and given her back her life and saved your father's heart from being broken, and that you wouldn't? That you'd rather run messages for a wild animal in a strange world that's no business of yours?" I don't think he's a wild animal," said Diggory in a dried-up sort of voice. I don't know." "Then he is something worse," said the witch. "Look at what he has done to you already. How heartless he has made you. That's what he does to everyone who listens to him. Cruel, pitiless boy, you'd let your own mother die rather than—" "Oh, shut up," said the miserable Diggory, still in the same voice. "Don't you think that I see that? But I promised." "Ah, but you didn't know what you were promising, and no one here can prevent you." "Mother herself," said Diggory, getting the words out with difficulty. "She wouldn't like it. She's awfully strict about keeping promises and not stealing and all that sort of thing. She would tell me not to do it, quick as anything, if she were here." "Oh, but she need never know," said the witch, speaking more sweetly than you would have thought anyone with so fierce a face could speak. You wouldn't tell her how you got the apple. Your father need never know. No one in your world needs to know anything about this whole story. You didn't take the little girl back with you, you know. And that's where the witch made her dreadful, fatal mistake. Of course, Diggory knew that Polly could get away by her own ring as easily as he could get away with his, but apparently the witch didn't know that. And the meanness of her suggestion that he should leave Polly suddenly behind made all the other things the witch had been saying to him seem false and hollow. And even in the middle of all his misery, his head suddenly cleared, and he said in a different and much louder voice, "Look here, where do you come into all of this? Why are you so precious fond of my mother all of a sudden? What's it got to do with you? What's your game?" "Good for you, Diggs," whispered Polly in his ear. "Quick, get away now." She hadn't dared to say anything through all this argument because you see, it wasn't her mother who was dying. "Up then," said Diggory, heaving her onto Fledge's back and scrambling up as quickly as he could, and the horse spread his wings. "Go then, fools," called the witch. "Think of me, boy, when you lie old and weak and dying, and remember how you threw away the chance of endless youth. It won't be offered to you again." They were already so high that they could only just hear her. Nor did the witch waste any time gazing up at them. They saw her set off northward down the slope of the hill. They had started early that morning, and what happened in the garden had not taken very long. So Fledge and Polly both said that they could easily get back to Narnia before nightfall. Diggory never spoke on the way back, and the others were shy of speaking to him. He was very sad, and he wasn't even sure all the time that he had done the right thing. But whenever he remembered the shining tears of Aslan's eyes, he became sure. All day Fledge flew steadily with untiring wings, eastward with the river to guide him, through the mountains and over the wild wooded hills, over the great waterfall, and down, down to where the woods of Narnia were darkened by the shadow of that mighty cliff, until at last, when the sky was growing red with sunset behind him, he could see a place where many creatures were gathered together by the riverside. And soon he could see Aslan himself in the midst of them. Fledge glided down, spread out his forelegs, and closed his wings, and landed cantering. And then he stopped. The children dismounted. Diggory saw all the animals, the dwarfs, the satyrs, the nymphs, and other things, drawing back to the left and right to make room for him. He walked up to Aslan, handed him the apple, and said, "I've brought you the apple you wanted, sir." And that is the end of chapter 13. I hope you'll come back and find out what happens next. Thank you for joining me today.